Good afternoon, friends. Before we listen to our colleagues from Africa, let us try to take a quick look at how the global scenario is looking at this topic and how India itself is trying to struggle to proceed with this topic. As all of you are aware, as world citizens, we are all passing through a very interesting but a very difficult phase of development. Initially, a couple of centuries back, the world as a whole, we were supposed to be in a scientific age, which gave rise to the technological age, then the post-industrial society after the Second World War, and then the environmental concerns came on the platform, and they resulted into the UNEX Rio Summit in 1992, and it set the direction of looking at the overall environmental management and particularly the link between water, ecology, human society and the development. One of the issues that came out of those deliberations was the requirement of the lakes, their place in the human development and the need for cleaning them up because of the adverse impact of the industrial society and the urban society. We are glad that this topic was picked up by Japan because of their success on Lake Biwa, and it gave rise to the establishment of the integrated lake basin management through the ILEC, the Lake Environment Committee. The lake basin management, initially, those who started looking at the lake basin management were really not aware about the multifaceted approach that is required for managing the lake. It's not technology alone. Engineers initially felt that we would be able to clean up this world by using technology. But then it was realized that the people's participation is very much critical for the condition of the lake. The institutions based on the professional or the governmental or the financial thing and resulting into the financial support for such initiatives, and finally backed up by adequate legal provisions to be effective on the ground. And all this, there has to be some information center which puts all these factors together, and when they work in coherence, we have what is really known as lake basin management. The lake by itself has to be looked at as a living creature, and it is getting impacted from what happens in agriculture in the basin, forests in the basin, urban settlements in the basin, industries in the basin, and at the same time the lake existence has a purpose, and the lake has to serve that purpose either through water supply, through navigation, through other services like hydropower or industrial supply, and it has also to face the large-scale evaporation in the dry, arid areas as in Africa or in South Asia. So lake management comprises of all these factors and activities being put together and managed on a scientific basis. In that context, when India first introduced its national water policy in 1986, it developed into two streams of activities. The first stream on the right side, they had a series of environmental legislation enabling the people to look at it in a more coherent manner. The policy itself was revised after 15 years experience, giving much better teeth to the environmental provision. It resulted into a national river action plan because the rivers also are facing the same problem like the lakes, and then it has now resulted into a national lake conservation program. On the other stream, on the other side, the national water policy gave rise to social participation in the different programs related with water management, either it is in irrigation or in urban management, and also naturally in the lake management. And for that purpose, a very good scientific professional organization of volunteers, so to say, who have a deep knowledge about ecology, about limnology, about aquatic biology, that Indian Association of Aquatic Biology took the lead and started a series of dialogues in the country and promoted the establishment of Lake Management Society. Locally, they are known as Reservoirs, the Society for Conservation and Management of Lake, and you find the reflection of both these streams of activity in the new policy that was announced in 2012, and it had many more detailed provisions for the management of the environment at large along with water and ecology. The different regions of the world have different characteristics. The lakes, for example, in Sweden do not show the same behavior as the lakes in Sri Lanka. Now, looking at the Indian scenario, there are two very typical characteristics. The southwest monsoon brings the inflow through the floods. It's not a perennial rainfall country, and that in that limited inflow period, you have a sudden rush of lot of debris coming into the river and the lake through 3 or 4 floods, and it also sweeps up lot of silt from the earth's surface. Because of the hot arid climate, the silt formation is very rapid. That gives rise to high silting rate in the lake. When India started after the Second World War, its development of reservoirs and water resources development projects, we tried to borrow some of the experiences from the European countries. But because the climate was different, soon we realized that the loss of storage because of the silt coming into the lake is much more than what the European countries are facing. And today, the lakes in India are losing somewhere between 0.15% to almost less than 2% every year. The smaller the lake and the flatter the basin, the flatter the catchment, the more is the silt production and the greater access of the silt to the lake. The more worrying point on which much has not yet been done is the question of excessive evaporation. Because of the arid hot climate, there is almost 2 meter loss from the water surface. So the shallow water bodies are very vulnerable to this process of evaporation. We are trying to develop some chemical films which can be spread in the liquid form on the surface of the lake and arrest the evaporation, but the success is roughly only 33%. The lakes and their existence have different purposes, different objectives. In India, they can be basically categorized into 3. The village tanks, they have fishery as a very good component, in particular the eastern part of India. The villages do harness fishery on a large scale. The urban lakes have a very different set of factors and the services that they provide. Tourism is coming up very well in the urban scenario, but we have a large number of religious lakes because of long religious tradition. And the old practices like offering flowers or other offerings into the lake, immersion of God's images, they are now leading to excessive pollution loads in the lake, and to make people aware of the damage of the old religious practices, a lot of effort is required, and voluntary organizations like Reservoirs are doing a good work in that context. What is worrying now is from the point of sustainability, does reservoir, like a human being or an animal being, have a life? It is a physical entity, but now we realize that because of the impact of the natural processes as well as the man-made environment around the reservoir possibly has a life. And the physical life is governed by the silting process. To overcome this, now in India, most of the storages, the lakes and the reservoirs you will find have large size gates, and when the floods come, these gates are opened so that the silt that is accumulated over and above the crest of the gate that gets flushed out, and almost 80 to 90% of the storage capacity, which is known as the live capacity to be filled up again and again every year, remains intact. And hopefully this type of management will eventually ensure a life of somewhere between 200 to 500 years for the lakes that are and the reservoirs that are existing. But in addition to the physical life which is lost by silting, we are now worried about the chemical life, because the chemicals from the effluents of the industries, they remain in water for a long time, and to clean up the entire lake is very, very difficult. And we are facing those problems in the, for example, near Calcutta, in the Damodar Basin, where mining activity is very intensive, and the washouts from the mines are getting into the lake and creating permanent chemical additions to the lake water, and it has still a problem which is not fully resolved. From the urban runoffs, the problem of eutrophication is there, leading to fish kills at number of places, and we are trying to address that problem through improved effluent treatments in the urban setup. In the overall context, we find that it's not only one stream of activities or corrective measures that can give you a success. Naturally, governments have always the primary responsibility as the promoter, as the initiator of development. They also provide the legal framework and also some promotional finance to begin with. But it has to be backed by adequate academic research, new knowledge about hydrology, about limnology, about the chemistry of water, and the technological innovation for the sewage treatment plant or water treatment plant. Fortunately now the private sector is coming up because they are realizing that their business itself is very much dependent on how the lakes in the country and the water in the country are protected. So there are many commercially viable activities like the water delivery or the sewage treatment plants, effluent disposal systems, and the private sector is addressing them in a variety of ways. The third line, which is very active in India, is the professional societies. They are voluntary societies of like the Indian Water Works Association or the Indian Aquatic Biology, and they are producing in the local languages guidelines on best practices, and they are very helpful for the communities which are getting organized for local governance and action. When these 5 streams of activities merge together in that lake basin, then we see the real beneficial impact of their work. But there is a difference between the way a small lake needs to be managed, a medium-sized lake needs to be managed, and a large-sized lake needs to be managed. We have learned that the feeling of ownership with the lake water community from people around the lake, particularly when the lakes are small and the basin size is less than 100 kilometers square, that is very effective in generating a self-regulatory mechanism locally, and the benefits are achieved in much lesser time because the relationship of the people and the basin are directly visible, and therefore the response from the people or the industry is very quick. And we have such examples. Powai has started showing results. Pushkar, we are making a beginning. Udaipur, it has started showing results. So these are some of the lakes which are already on their march ahead to a better situation. As far as the medium-sized lakes are concerned, there are more than 100 kilometers square in the, as far as the basins are concerned. Their lake size is 100 kilometers square and the basin size is up to 10,000 kilometers square. There, the lake water community is not clearly visible. Therefore, what we need is a basin water partnership, because there are many urban settlements, many industrial locations, and unless all of them come together and think about a collective management of the lake, the things don't start moving. So it has to be a collaborative setup, and people have to understand the relationship, which is a complex relationship between the lake basin, and the human interference in the lake basin. We have about half a dozen such river water partnerships which have started working, and hopefully in the next 10 years we will see the good impact of that on the quality of the lake. But the things which are still not very visible from the outside are the conditions of the lakes, which are very large, more than 100 kilometers square in size. The basin size is more than 100,000 square kilometers. We have such basins and the lakes like that, and there the government's involvement is inescapable, because they have to bring together a large number of very powerful agencies. They have to provide a legal backup. They need a formal establishment by law of a basin authority to make these different institutions work in a coherent manner, because the relationship in such large basins are invisible. You don't see the lake in front of you. The lake is far away from you, and therefore to psychologically integrate you with the lake, you need many other measures, including the legal measures. Now, looking at the overall world scenario, this year there is an emphasis, and now we have simultaneously the Africa dialogue going on here itself in this building. There is the Human Development Report of the United Nations. If you look at the title of the report itself, the title is South is Rising, the latest report. So it shows that the rising South must develop some other linkages within themselves, so that they'll start learning from each other, in addition to what they learn from the developed nations in the North also. One of the simplest things that can be done is exchanging information, so that we know how things are improving elsewhere, transfer of knowledge and skills, and also, if possible, providing some catalytic finance to make a beginning. But for success, there are certain requirements. We cannot copy each other's experience in a mechanical manner. There has to be a climatic similarity. The basin size and lake size have also to be rather close to each other. The level of industrialization and urbanization in the basin has also to be more or less of the same scale. And the governance pattern, whether democratic or autocratic, has also much to do as far as the overall management system is concerned. So based on this, we can identify lakes or countries where we can encourage international twinning practices, and they start working together, beginning with institutional exchanges. And as far as India is concerned, having generated a lot of experience, the first step that India will have to take in the context of South-South cooperation is developing data banks. And the Indian Association of Aquatic Biology and the Reservoirs, they are already thinking about measures on this line. I hope moving further in this direction would soon give us a much better world than what we have inherited so far. Thank you.